Graceful amber window, coffee.
I have heard the phrase, "you're always knitting anyway," more than I'd like, and it took me a long time to realize why that sentence bothered me so much. Because the statement itself is true, I am always knitting or crocheting anyway, but not the inference that they are trying to give to it. Hi, welcome to One Spawn Stitch Nook. I am Nadia, and I am going to be working on my free ring cardigan here, duplicate stitching some design to it, while I talk to you about slowness in the fiber arts. Now, to be fair, not everything in fiber arts is slow. Some projects are intentionally fast, chunky yarns, simple stitches, repetitive construction. These are the kind of things you're going to be seeing at craft fair markets because they make sense to produce. Certain yarn weights and techniques are designed for speed, and some people genuinely enjoy the finished object more than the process. For them, a long term project wouldn't be as relaxing, it would be frustrating. And that's completely valid in itself. Videos like this are meant to address an overall misunderstanding and one that's especially directed towards knitters but crocheters as well. Because depending on one's exposure to the fiber arts, they may be getting some mixed messages. Because a friend may make a bunch of baby blankets, for an example, and give them easily. But then they might see someone online complaining that people keep asking for granny square queen size blankets or knit sweaters, and they can't possibly make that for free. Often it's based on the relationship. We'll talk about that in a bit. But that may confuse that person because they see their friend doing a little hobby and it seems like it's not costing her greatly. What these people are complaining about, they'll wonder to themselves because there's this odd contrast. So it just seems like they're being, um, you know, uh, selfish with their time or just complaining to complain. It's understandable why, based on limited exposure, they would be confused. Or on the other side, sometimes even makers get upset with those who make a lot or make fast for creating this concept in uh, the non-fiber arts people's minds that this labor is minute and can be asked or demanded of from any fiber artist because people don't recognize that a lot of fiber arts is slow by nature. Or they may disagree with making things quick and with cheap yarn because that doesn't align with their values of high quality and highly invested in pieces. Like I said, some pieces can be made fast and can be sold fairly cheap. This is a limited area of fiber arts, though, and one most people probably get exposed to the most because they're the things you're going to see at the craft fairs or your friend's going to be gifting at the baby showers and things of that sort. And those are the items that are going to be interacting with the public. So I want to acknowledge the nuance and not present a blanket statement about all fiber arts is slow. Um, just know that a great deal of fiber arts does indeed, though, take a lot of time investment and utilizes more involved stitch techniques or finer tools. So back to that question of people asking for our time to make them things or not understanding why we would make something slowly instead of buying it from a store if it's going to take that long. People can get quite uppity about that. Is often this concept of time, and particularly in the US, I find it's quite interesting. In the US, especially, we're taught that time has to earn its keep. If it's not producing income, no progress, or something useful to someone else, it is quietly labeled as free. The time is in a free category. And once time is seen as free, people feel surprisingly comfortable laying claim to it. That's why so many makers hear things like, "Can you make me a sweater?" And when pushed back on, either a no or say or trying to explain why, they'll come back with the line, "But you're always knitting anyway. It can't be that hard." Or you're going to be using that time up anyway. When asking for a free sweater, blanket, or plushie, it's said casually, but there's an assumption underneath it that this time isn't fully yours. That because it's enjoyable, because it looks calm, because it's done at home, it could easily be redirected. It could towards a favor, towards a gift, towards someone else's needs. What that creates over time is this subtle pressure to justify self directed time, to explain why you're allowed to spend hours making something that isn't for anyone else but yourself. And that's not harmless. It changes through the relationships. It teaches people that enjoyment needs permission, that personal growth or care has to defend itself to be legitimate. In a lot of other cultures, time spent learning, resting, or making is understood as a necessary thing. It's not seen as being overly indulgent. It's not seen as being idle. It's just part of being a healthy person. It's understood that you need to have personal interests. It's understood that you should have your hobbies, things to socialize with, clubs. Those things are seen as crucial, even. But here in the US, if your time isn't obviously productive, it is treated as negotiable. And this is where slow fiber arts become almost confrontational because slowness refuses to hide time. When I work on this cardigan, for example, the fine gauge, the color work of the free ring character, and now the duplicate stitching you see me doing now, I'm doing it in real time on screen for a reason. Usually I try to make editing a little more clippy. I might speed it up, but I decided very specifically to show you this very, very slow process. And you can watch as the minutes have passed by and see almost nothing change. I'm not making that much progress in this time slot. And that makes people uncomfortable because it breaks the expectation that effort should look productive at every moment. This is also where the boyfriend sweater curse comes in. And I think it's often misunderstood. The joke explanation is just superstition, right? But the more honest answer, I think, is about exposure. When someone knits a sweater for their boyfriend, the boyfriend doesn't just receive a finished object. He witnessed the process. He sees the hours his girlfriend is knitting. He sees her restarting after mistakes. He sees her making adjustments. Sees that she's checking the fit on his body, asking his opinion. Does he like the color? Does it feel right? Is it fitting the way he would like it? The constant adjusting to make it better. He watches someone invest sustained effort and care specifically for him. And sometimes that's the moment things fall apart. Not because the sweater is cursed, of course, but because it forces a comparison. The girlfriend is visibly demonstrating the level of commitment she's willing to bring to the relationship. And the boyfriend realizes, consciously or not, that he isn't at the same place to meet that level of effort in the relationship. So he often leaves. Sometimes it's out of fear, sometimes it might be out of honesty or respect, acknowledging that he is not at this point with her and that would be disrespectful to move forward after she has made this very clear declaration, basically, of investment into him. And it's an investment of time, as we've talked about. Sometimes because of the imbalance, uh, it just becomes impossible to ignore, I think, once either the sweater is underway or has been completed. And that's what handmade work does. It makes invisible labor more visible, and not everyone is comfortable with what that reveals. And so I think that's quite the contrast why there's this boyfriend sweater curse versus, a family member, a friend, or a coworker, even people not very tied to you asking you to make them something that requires a lot of time and skill from you, either for free or for cost of materials. They don't get to see that work. Yeah, they see you old time knitting, and so they think, oh, looks like that, it's just your hobby. That's kind of the thing you do. How about you do that for me? And there's since you're not being paid for that time you're devoting to it, you're already willing to use that time just for a hobby. Um, and briefly, I would like to kind of call back to a historical reference towards the practice of spinning. So spinning wool and cotton or other materials into yarn or thread was a job that was done around the clock. And this was back when it was more paid. I think we're talking definitely medieval times, but probably earlier than that. And I'm not sure how far after. But we got the word spinster for an old maid from that because that was one of the few jobs that women could do to a full extent to actually make a somewhat livable wage. Maybe they would still live at home with their parents, but they could feasibly carry themselves without having to marry. Thus, we called older women who didn't marry spinsters. But just to kind of note on that back then the women were going to be like just constantly again within that free time. It was like any time that wasn't allocated to something else, they were constantly going back to the spinning because it needed to be made. You need to make lots of it, constant work, uh, difficult work to that extreme. But it was seen as an occupation, it was seen as valid work, and it was so out in the open and seen by everyone that it was more recognized, even if it was belittled a bit as being more of a womanly um, work and the pay wasn't as good. But just kind of a note there that I wanted to pull in that reference there that, again, at least the value was undeniable as far as the time that took. You couldn't deny it for that. And when it comes to time again, something else I think about a lot, especially when people question how I use my time, is how unevenly we value different kinds of investment, particularly of time. If you spend years in college, no one asks what are you doing with your time, uh, and you might get a few people who think it's a waste of time, but for the majority, it's seen as a very good use of your time. If you take job training, certifications, or professional development, those hours are praised. They're even seen as responsible, forward thinking. Even when they're exhausting or expensive, they make sense to people because of the outcome is legible. There's a degree, there's a title or a paycheck, but that it may not actually benefit much to your life. You may not end up working that job. So many people who start in college either change their majors or don't utilize their major at all, where they end up working. So it seems like that time actually, I guess I got to learn some stuff, but that was quite costly to learn something that didn't go towards what I work in. So it's kind of a case by case basis on that, but that's something to consider. But when you spend years developing a personal skill, something creative, something physical, or something slow, the reaction shifts, like with knitting or crocheting. Suddenly, the question isn't about admiration, it's justification. What's this for? Where is it going? Can it be sold? Can it be useful to someone else? Oh my goodness, are we not overwhelmed by, I'm like, oh, you can sell that. Will you sell that? Can I pay you to make me something? Again, at a price they don't realize usually, unless it's, again, something smaller, something that can be quickly paid. But the point being, they're looking for how is this going to get monetized? And if it's not, why are you doing it? And that's such a narrow way to understand growth because the investment is still real. Learning fiber arts takes study, repetition, patience, and problem solving, just like learning anything at school would. It builds up discipline, it builds confidence, it builds the ability to sit with difficulty without abandoning it. That's a huge skill to have. It's a good life skill. And those are the same qualities we praise in formal education, just without the institutional approval. But they're not acknowledged as being comparable. The difference in that is that college and job training are socially sanctioned. They're allowed to take time within our society. They're allowed to be inefficient at first. No one says, well, you're always studying anyway. Could you just do this for me while you're at it? That's just not a thing. But hobbies get that, they don't get that kind of protection. Time spent on them is treated as flexible, interruptible, even if that's a word. It's available. And once again, that pushes people into thinking like they have to defend time spent on themselves. Even I remember I struggled with the justification why I wanted to rest that day just because rest sounded good. I felt my body was telling me it could use some rest today. But if I couldn't justify that, I'm physically not able to say no to this thing or have a conflict of interest with something else. Rest didn't seem like a good enough justification. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, more personal experience where I had that revelation that, oh, wait, that is a perfectly valid reason to say no. That time I can use for just rest. And slow fiber arts sit right at that fault line because when you knit something like this cardigan you see me working on, you're seeing the result of years of learning. Even if you only witness a few inches of progress here, the time isn't just in the object or just in what I'm doing now. It's embedded in the hands that are making it. My hands have spent years working to learn to do what I'm doing. I haven't done much duplicate stitching, which might right now be adding to the time it's taken me to work on this. Plus, it's a little more difficult when I have the camera set up because I'm trying to show it a little better. Um, I would usually be orienting my arms a little differently, but that being aside, I still think I'm fairly slow at the duplicate stitching, but I've been so proud of myself for learning to have more even proper stitches because before I was having more and more gaps and I finally was learning and getting a good rhythm to it. So that's just an example of a recent development and something that right now is still more, what you might say, juvenile or in the early stages of developing this particular skill. And yes, some people choose the speed. Some choose projects that finish quickly. Some only care about the end result. Some people don't invest fully into being very comprehensive in the craft, not learning to follow patterns or figure out just some basics of how things structurally work. It's much like when you're learning to draw. A lot of people don't want to learn anatomy, they don't want to learn gesture, they don't want to learn the basics. They just want to draw a pretty picture. So they'll learn to trace or draw their, Disney or anime characters, and that's good enough for them. And sometimes that's a good place to start. And then you can learn that actually, that's how I came to it. I realized, oh, you know what? I really need to learn more of the skeleton and how to build up a drawing. So, all that being said, others are here for the long arc. We are here for the practice of it, for the quiet accumulation of skill that doesn't need to justify itself by becoming a side hustle. That's why I keep coming back to slowness, not as being an aesthetic, but as a value. Slowness creates space where time doesn't have to earn its worth, where making something with your hands can be enough all on its own. And maybe that's why it's so often misunderstood, because it asks people to accept that not all meaningful investments lead to a credential, a profit, or something that they can claim in a tangible sense. And I would say I think a lot of people actually do understand this, even if they've never put it into words, put the words to it. You can feel it when you're doing something you love, and a small voice starts to asking you if you should be doing something more useful instead. If you're spending your time reading, even things, less, I feel somewhat productive when I'm crocheting or knitting, but I found it's very difficult for me lately to be reading because it feels like I'm not getting anything done right now. So even things like that, you'll hear that nagging voice in your head. And that the voice didn't come from nowhere. It was taught. And when you give yourself time to make something slowly or to learn something that doesn't lead anywhere obvious, you're quietly pushing back against that voice. That can feel uncomfortable at first. It can even feel selfish. But it's not innately. Because that time spent developing yourself, your patience, your focus, and your joy, that doesn't disappear just because it isn't monetized. It shows up everywhere else in your life, even if no one can point to it and say, that's what it was for. It does translate to that. It does translate to your overall well being and keeping you a more functioning, healthy person. And unless we keep popping pills in America, people turn to substances or things to just keep the grind going. And that's not, I think, how we should be functioning at all. Slow fiber arts just makes that very visible. They give you something tangible at the end of the process that was never really about the object in the first place. And another part of this that I think we don't talk about enough is sometimes that reaction that I've been touching on to slow making. It isn't about you, the maker. It's about what it brings up in the other person or people. When someone hasn't given themselves permission to rest, to learn slowly, or to invest in something as you have, just because it matters to them, something about watching someone else do that can be deeply uncomfortable. And it's not, it's most likely not even conscious. It's not even malicious. It's not, um, you know, something they're, understanding in that moment. But internally, it's poking at them as something unresolved. So instead of sitting with that discomfort and taking a moment to analyze, oh, why did I just feel that? They want to fix it. They want to make the feeling go away, and the they direct it towards you. They question the usefulness of what you're doing. They suggest a better way to spend your time. They redirect your effort towards something practical or towards themselves, not because they need the object per se, but because they need that feeling to go away. Of course, this isn't all cases, but I think this can be some of the reason we get this question so much. Slow fiber arts makes this especially visible. Excuse me, especially visible because there's no urgency, there's no justification, no performance of busyness. You're just there, stitching, taking your time, and that quiet confidence can feel destabilizing to someone who's been taught that time must always be optimized. In that sense, the pressure to explain yourself isn't really about the sweater. It's not about the project or the yarn. It's about restoring those familiar rules, about making sure time goes back to being something that's controlled, productive, and accounted for. But when you choose slowness, choosing to learn, you're choosing to make, you're choosing to enjoy something without apologizing for it. That breaks that agreement, and not everyone knows how to be around that without trying to correct it. And that's why we fiber artists talk so much about slowness and slow fashion and things of that sort, is because we've kind of broken out of that thinking. We kind of had to acknowledge it with ourselves, and now we're pushing back against this idea we keep encountering from others again, and sometimes within ourselves. And that's why slow making can feel quietly radical. It's not loud, it's not overly performative all the time, but it's just unmoved, I guess you could say. And maybe that's the quiet invitation here. Not necessarily to knit or to crochet or to make anything at all, but to consider what kinds of time you allow yourself to have without any explanation.